Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something visually fascinating. The incredible human diversity within just one country, Colombia. It has, what, 52 million people?
That's right, 52 million. And the range of appearances, well, it's really quite something.
It really is. I mean, think about it. You could be walking through Bogotá and see Colombians who are tall, light-skinned, maybe with green or hazel eyes. Then you could travel, say, west to the Pacific coast to Chocó.
A very different picture.
Totally different. You'd find Afro-Colombians, deep ebony skin, tightly coiled hair, really strong features.
But don't forget the highlands.
Exactly. High up in the Andes, you might meet indigenous groups, bronze skin, almond-shaped eyes. It's this amazing spectrum.
It truly is.
So in this deep dive, we're going to use the sources you sent over to really try and unravel the why behind all this. We want to get past the stereotypes,
Absolutely.
understand what makes Colombia's people look so different from each other. That's our mission today.
And it's more than just skin deep, isn't it? We're looking at history, genetics, migration.
Right.
We'll explore those historical roots, then break down some specific traits, skin, eyes, hair, even height. And crucially, we'll touch on how this all feeds into identity in Colombia today.
It sounds like a story of blending, migration, resilience.
Exactly. All woven together.
Okay, let's dive in then. The sources suggest this diversity really boils down to kind of three main ancestral pillars.
That's the foundation, yes. Three major sources.
Yeah.
First, you absolutely have to start with the indigenous peoples. Before any Europeans arrived, pre-1500s, this land was teeming with hundreds of distinct groups.
Like the Muisca Quimbaya.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Muisca, Quimbaya, Tairona. Complex societies. And physically, you typically see features like medium to dark, copper-toned skin, usually straight black hair, and often a somewhat shorter build. They were the original inhabitants.
Okay, route number one.
Then comes the massive shift.
Yeah.
European influence. Starting in the 1500s, Spanish colonization brought people, mostly from Spain, obviously. They introduced lighter skin tones, generally taller stature, more variation in eye and hair color.
And crucially, there was mixing, right?
Oh, absolutely crucial. Extensive intermarriage, primarily between Spanish men and indigenous women. This wasn't just occasional, it was widespread. And it directly created the mestizo population.
Who are now the majority.
By a significant margin. Estimates put them at around 58 to 60% of the population today.
Wow. Okay, so indigenous, European, what's the third pillar?
African ancestry. This is tied to the transatlantic slave trade, a truly dark period. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, nearly 1.2 million Africans were forcibly brought to Colombia.
1.2 million. That's a staggering number.
It is. And their descendants make up about 9 to 11% of Colombians now. You see their strongest presence, genetically and culturally, along the Pacific and Caribbean coasts.
Makes sense, given the ports and historical plantations there.
Exactly. And we should also briefly mention later migrations, people from the Middle East, some from Italy, Germany. They came later, late 19th, early 20th century, and added further sort of threads to the genetic tapestry, especially in certain cities or regions.
Okay, so those are the big three, plus some later additions. But what really jumped out at me from the genetic studies in the sources...
Let me guess the indigenous ancestry finding.
Yes. Here's where it gets really interesting, I think. It says nearly all Colombians have some indigenous ancestry, even if they don't identify that way at all. How big a deal is that?
Oh, it's huge. It tells you just how fundamental that initial blending was. I mean, those indigenous roots aren't confined to specific communities. They're literally part of the background genetic landscape for almost everyone.
Like a midden layer?
Sort of, yeah. A testament to the enduring legacy of those first peoples, even after centuries of mixing.
Okay, that really sets the stage. So with those ancestral roots laid down, let's get into the specific features. Skin tone first, the sources say Colombia has one of the widest ranges in Latin America.
It really does. You can visually see this incredible spectrum across the country. Census boxes might try to categorize mestizo, white, Afro-Colombian, indigenous, but that genetic reality we just talked about makes it much more fluid.
And the regional differences are stark. Like the Caribbean coast, Cartagena, Barranquilla, you see a lot of bronze, light brown tones.
Yes, very much reflecting that Spanish-African mix. Beautiful blend.
But then you go over to the Pacific, to Chocó.
And it's predominantly deep ebony skin tones, a very clear, strong African ancestral heritage visible right there.
And contrast that again with the Andes, Boyacá, Cundinamarca near Bogotá.
Much more prevalence of lighter skin tones, features often associated with European ancestry. It's like different palettes in different regions.
But it's not just about appearance, is it? The sources talk about the societal weight of skin tone.
No, definitely not just appearance. Historically, and this is a tough reality, lighter skin often correlated with more power, more privilege.
While darker-skinned Afro-Colombians and indigenous people faced marginalization.
Systemic marginalization, yes. And even though Colombia officially celebrates its multiculturalism, now you see it in laws. Festivals. Those social inequalities linked to skin tone, they sadly persist.
So it's still a point of tension.
It absolutely is. There's this ongoing debate about who gets centered, whose beauty standards are promoted, versus the lived reality of discrimination for many. It's complex.
Okay, moving from skin to eyes. Most people probably assume brown eyes are the norm in Colombia.
And they'd be mostly right. About 80, maybe 85% do have brown eyes.
There's a but coming, I feel.
There is. That European ancestry we mentioned didn't just affect skin tone. Genetic studies, including one from 2017 mentioned in the materials, show that a pretty significant chunk, 15 to 20% of Colombians carry genes for hazel, green, or even blue eyes.
15 to 20%, that seems surprisingly high.
It does, doesn't it? And you see it more concentrated in certain areas. Antioquia is a classic example, also Bogotá, other Andean regions where European settlement was stronger historically.
I loved that anecdote in the sources about tourists being genuinely surprised seeing so many light-eyed people in some Antiochian towns.
Right. It challenges their preconceptions.
Mm-hmm.
Makes them think about that sort of hidden European history.
But it's important to clarify for Afro-Colombians and indigenous groups, dark brown eyes are overwhelmingly the norm, reflecting their own distinct ancestral lines.
Absolutely. That consistency is also part of the story.
Okay, so skin, eyes. What about body build and height? Is there an average Colombian physique?
Well, averages can be deceiving, as always. But for the record, average height is around 5'7" for men, 5'3" for women. That's about 170 centimeters and 160 centimeters.
And again, regional variations.
Huge variations, and it links back to ancestry and environment. People in the Andes, especially with more European heritage, tend to be a bit taller, maybe leaner.
Okay.
Contrast that with many indigenous groups, say in the Amazon or Orinoco regions. They're often shorter, stockier. This might be partly an environmental adaptation over generations.
Interesting. And Afro-Colombians?
Often described as having more mesomorphic, builds broader shoulders, more naturally muscular frames. Again, links are often drawn to their West African ancestry.
The sources also mention nutrition playing a role, sadly.
Yes, that's a crucial overlay. Wealthier, often urban Colombians with better access to nutrition tend to be taller. But in poorer rural areas, childhood stunting due to malnutrition is still a real problem. The health surveys mentioned suggest about 13% of young children are affected.
A stark reminder of inequality. Okay, let's talk hair and faces. This seems like another area of incredible variety.
Definitely. Hair texture is almost a defining trait of the diversity. You've got the straight, usually dark black hair, common among indigenous and many mestizo people.
And maybe wavier, lighter brown hair with more European ancestry.
Exactly. And then the wonderfully distinct, tightly coiled, curly textures that are characteristic of Afro-Colombians.
The sources had that great image. Imagine siblings in one family, one with straight hair, one with curls, one with coils.
That really sums it up, doesn't it? It shows how the genetic lottery plays out within families, reflecting that deep ancestral mixing.
And facial features follow suit. No single look.
Not at all. You might see narrower noses, more angular faces linked to European lines, broader noses, fuller lips, rounder features often associated with African ancestry, high cheekbones, almond eyes, maybe a broader face from indigenous heritage.
So the combinations are basically endless, especially in the mestizo population.
Infinite variations.
Yeah.
It makes describing one typical Colombian face completely impossible and probably pointless.
Which is a perfect segue. Let's talk about how these roots and features shape identity today, especially for indigenous and Afro-Colombian communities. They seem very active in asserting their place.
They are. Colombia officially recognizes over 100 distinct indigenous groups. That's maybe 1.5 to 2 million people total. Think of the Wayu in La Guajira, the Nasa in Cauca, the Ember in Chocó.
And they often maintain distinct physical traits.
Yes, alongside their languages and cultures. That copper-brown skin, the straight black hair, the almond-shaped eyes, high cheekbones, these features are often strongly preserved.
And many live in more remote areas, which helps preserve those traits.
That's often been the case, historically. It allowed for less intermixing in some communities. But remember that genetic point indigenous ancestry is widespread, even if subtle, across the broader population too. It's a living heritage.
Now, Afro-Colombians, a huge population, right? One of the largest black populations in Latin America.
Absolutely. Nearly 5 million people identify as Afro-Colombian, concentrated, as we said, in places like Chocó, Valle del Cauca, Cartagena, Barranquilla.
And their features reflect that heritage, the range of darker skin tones, the curly coiled hair.
Yes, and often strong facial structures.
Mm.
But their contribution goes way beyond appearance. Their cultural impact is immense.
You mean music, food?
Oh, definitely. Salsa, carulao music, the sound of the marimba, and the food. Afro-Caribbean cuisine is just incredible, integral to Colombian culture. It's everywhere.
But the sources also stress the challenges they still face. Systemic inequality.
Yes, that's the persistent issue. National data consistently shows they earn less, like 30% less on average than white Colombians, and face higher unemployment. It's a stark contrast to the celebration of their culture.
Which must fuel debates about representation and what Colombian really means.
Exactly. It forces a conversation about whose identity gets fully valued and who still faces barriers. It's ongoing and it's important.
So all this diversity, all these distinct groups, it leads right back to that big question you raised earlier.
Is there a typical Colombian look?
Yeah. The sources really frame this as a debate. Externally, people might have stereotypes, right? Maybe based on beauty queens.
Often favoring lighter skin, European features.
Or maybe based on famous musicians or athletes who might be Afro-descended.
Right. Those external stereotypes exist. But internally, within Colombia, the conversation is much richer and more contested.
Some argue the mestizo majority defines the typical look.
Some do, yes, based purely on numbers. But many Colombians would strongly disagree. They'd argue that Colombia is its regions, its diversity, that there is no single look.
And you see that regional pride. The sources mention the paisas from Medellín, often taller, fairer.
Contrasted with the costeños from the Caribbean, often darker, reflecting that Spanish-African mix.
Then the Pacific Coast Afro-Colombians, the indigenous Amazonian groups. Each region has its own strong visual identity.
Exactly. It makes a single typical look, a very tough sell domestically. People identify strongly with their region and its specific heritage.
So it really becomes a question about national identity itself.
Precisely. Is Colombia one unified people, or is it more like a collection of distinct people sharing a flag and a nationality? It's a deep question about unity versus diversity that the country constantly navigates.
What an incredible tapestry we've explored. If we try to synthesize this, Colombia's diversity is this living story, isn't it? Indigenous resilience, African strength, European migration, all mixed together.
Beautifully put. And you see it physically skinned, from ebony to ivory, eyes brown, green, blue, hair coiled, curly, straight. It's all there.
And it's not a finished story, is it? The sources suggest it's still evolving.
Definitely not finished. Demographers expect continued diversification. Think about recent immigration, like the huge influx of Venezuelans, over 2.5 million people. That's already adding new layers.
Plus, high rates of intermarriage continue.
Yes, ensuring future generations will likely be even more blended. And crucially, indigenous and Afro-Colombian communities are pushing hard for greater recognition, for their distinct identities to be fully seen and valued as central to Colombia, not peripheral.
So, the final thought for you, listening. Next time you think of Colombia, try not to picture just one face. Don't rely on a simple stereotype. Instead, imagine this whole nation of faces. Coastal faces, highland faces, city faces, rural faces. Each carrying a different history, a different piece of the story, but all part of this complex Colombian identity. This deep dive really shows that beauty isn't about sameness, is it? It's about the richness that comes from difference, from every unique story woven into the national fabric.